everybody's here. All right, so good afternoon. We are honored to have here Dr. Svetlana Shenderova, which is a researcher, expert, and consultant in the internationalization of higher education, university governance, and collaborative degree management. She is a visiting researcher affiliated with the Higher Education Group, Administrative Studies, the Faculty of Management and Business of Tampere University, and also with the Aleksanteri Institute Faculty of Arts of the University of Helsinki in Finland. So she has a broad kind of experience and expertise that includes Israel, China, Brazil, the European Union, and of course, with a particular focus on Finland, but also with Poland. Naturally, because Svetlana is from Russia, she has a very intensive knowledge of post-socialist countries and, of course, of Russia itself, right? She is presenting today about the shadows of internationalization, a new conceptual lens for the effects of internationalization policy. So, Svetlana, I will pass the floor to you. And basically, I would like you to do a presentation until 4:45, and then we would open the floor for questions. So thank you so much for coming, and we're looking forward to see your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor HORTA, for your kind introduction. Do you see the slide? Oh, great.
Yes.
Dear colleagues, dear students, dear guests, it's an honor to present the article and the new concept, The Shadows of Internationalization, for such a distinguished audience. I'm thankful to Professor Hugo HORTA, his colleagues at the Consortium of Higher Education Research in Asia, CHARE, and the University of Hong Kong for kind invitation and hosting this event. I am proud to present you the shadows of internationalization as a concept developed in cooperation with my esteemed colleagues, Dr. Suvi Jokila, Dr. Sauliana Finova, Dr. Yingxin Liu, who is a graduate of the University of Hong Kong, together with Harshita Sharma and Natalia Steen, whom we hope to title as the doctors soon. At this slide, you can see the names and geography of authors. In addition, I am appreciated to the teams of Higher Education Group and International Political Economy Group at Tampere University, and to Aleksanteri Institute of Russian, Eastern European, and Eurasian Studies at the University of Helsinki, Finland, for their support of my studies. This forum proposes a conceptual lens to explore what might be happening behind the publicly declared goals of internationalization policies, summarizes the lessons learned or not by their stakeholders, and suggests improvements to the internationalization policies of countries with different traditions when these internationalization policies intersect. The purposes of our study, the most important words in definitions are highlighted by bold. These words relate to intentional character of internationalization, quality of education for all students and staff, and meaningful contribution to society as the internationalization of higher education aim. We also stress the focus of research on who are the beneficiaries of internationalization. Thus, internationalization aims to contribute to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goal SDG 4, target 4.3, equal access to quality higher education and lifelong learning for all. The Bologna process documents and national policies of the European higher education area and its member states envisage this principle reflected at the slide, being applicable to all forms of internationalization implemented both within EHEA countries and universities, and to their collaboration with the foreign partners. We speak in this slide about European and values which are understood in Europe as fundamental and necessary for higher education as it is. Academic freedom together with responsibility, participation of students and staff in higher education governance, in principle of partnerships and collegiality, and responsibility of higher education towards the broader society. However, the perception of these values has varied significantly both within the European higher education area and outside it, including in those countries that also implemented their own internationalization policies in collaboration with EHEA members. Discussing access to international education is understood as a public good in Europe and as a privilege in some other countries. This is the most substantial thing which often is undervalued in current research. For example, in post-Soviet countries, the privileges are focused on non-material opportunities for internationalization. It means access to higher education, to international higher education, low teaching workload, which makes available any international activity and quality research as well, and access to information about international opportunities. This study conceptualizes what happens when the internationalization policies promoting a European view of fundamental academic values, when this view is implemented in countries where these values are perceived in another way. It is not good or bad. Is it a university democracy in European view or not? But in post-socialist countries, we have deal with another landscape. It's just other, not bad or good. Of course, until it does not violate the basic fundamental values. For this purpose, we use the term dark side effects. That means the effects that are the opposite of those which have been stated in the policy documents. Therefore, when the internationalization policy aims to enhance quality of education and research for all students and staff, do you remember our first definition? The dark side effects mean the decline of quality and equity in higher education, including international education, which is now a part of quality education. We suggest the term shadows in the internationalization of higher education for all decision-making processes, leading to the dark side effects of policies, threatening the core values, and hindering the achievement of equal quality education as a sustainable development goal. Of course, the concept of unintended consequences of internationalization is widespread. Unintended consequences of any policy is widely known term. And if we look at the literature, for example, recent book of Kamyab and Rebi, we find that the concept of unintended consequences of internationalization mainly focuses on unexpected character of action. However, the classic definition of internationalization insists that internationalization, and again we return to the first definition, internationalization is the intentional process. Thus, the shadows of education, the shadows of education would not be considered as something unexpected. And the shadows of internationalization can't be considered as unintended consequences because they appear as the results of deliberate efforts behind the facade of democratic internationalization policy. Furthermore, the decision-making processes at the intersection of internationalization policies enabled their stakeholders not only to legitimize and ensuring these dark side effects, but to build their simulacra of democratic values to control the resources formally aimed at supporting internationalization based on allegedly shared values. In terms of internationalization policies and practices, countries vary in the extent to which national universities are included and enabled to participate in international cooperation and competition. In these countries, it is the elite universities and their staff that are able to benefit from this. Hence, the appearance of shadows at the intersection of internationalization policies does not depend on the volume, diversity, and duration of internationalization support, or on the complexity of the actors and network governed by internationalization policies. National traditions of policy implementation and university governance, together with the rationales of the stakeholders operating globally and locally at macro, meso, and individual level, are of crucial importance. Now, we consider how the shadows appear and generate dark side effects using the case of Finland-Russia internationalization. The main scope of data has been gathered in 2017-2022 by the team of the Edu Neighbors project. So at the slide, you can see the list of government and supranational programs funded internationalization with Russia. There are the funding programs supported internationalization at macro level. And here, this is the list of Russian government programs funding the internationalization of the leading universities with the global north, and particularly EU and EU member states. The years of the program validity are given in accordance with the initial documents. Considering this list under an angle of equal access, we see that narrow number of institutions were funded in comparison with the total number of accredited universities. It should be noted that, of course, internationalization policy can't support any university in the country. It's useless. But the problem is that in Russia, when internationalization was funded and administratively supported in the leading universities, other universities lost their chance to internationalize at all. So despite Russia's full participation in the Bologna process in 2003-2022, its corresponding commitments to share the core values and multiple long-term partnerships supported by European and Finnish internationalization policies, Russian policy in this field following the Soviet approach and considered internationalization of higher education as a privilege, distributed in a top-down manner for a limited number of predominant stakeholders. Just a moment. This led to the emergence of such dark side effects as unequal access to internationalization activities for Russian students and academics, while selected university administrators prevailed. This citation illustrates understanding of internationalization and fundamental values as the privilege. The authors of this citation were deeply involved in internationalization policy, development, and evaluation in Russia. As a result, the sector has been stratified in a late Soviet manner, where few universities, their students and academics were more equal than the others. Remarkably, that the promoters of internationalization policy use for the privileged universities the word zona in Russian, which is also informally uses in relation to the prisoner camps in penitentiary system, including the special camps where the imprisoned scientists were involved into nuclear weapon development in the USSR. So look how the term of internationalization symbolizes globally an openness of university and higher education system to the world, how this term was perverted by Russian policy makers and policy development. It was performed to zona, a closed area where it is not possible to live for participants. Despite the declaration of commitment to the Bologna principles. At meso level, inequality manifested in separation of quality assurance procedures, lack of clearly understandable arrangements of curricular harmonization between the partners, and unsustainable enrollment, despite the interest of students and academics to cooperation. In addition, those members of staff who traveled regularly were not necessarily involved directly in programs, related research, and interaction with students. I remember a case from my practice when I discussed the situation with one of respondents, and this respondent told, one people travel, other people work. It means that traveling in many Russian universities is perceived as a sort of rest, as a privilege, again, while the other work in the audience with students. And I should say that average teaching workload in Russian universities and even in privileged Russian universities for unprivileged academics is about 800 hours per year, per study year, 800 of contact hours. So furthermore, the decision-making processes at the intersection of internationalization policies enable their stakeholders not only to legitimize and ensuring these dark side effects, but to build the simulacra to control resources formally aimed at supporting internationalization based on allegedly shared values. EU-Russia internationalization did not provide sustainable democratic institutions in the partnerships at the university and degree program level, but constructing their simulacra. International partners were indifferent to this, especially if Russian partner universities provided the enrollment of international students and therefore funding and KPI achievement. In Russia, policy documents prioritize quantitative KPIs that led to usage of European funding for reporting and simulacra building. For example, a series of government programs provided targeted funding for a limited number of specially selected universities, aimed to increase the number of collaborative, including joint and double degrees, and outcoming mobility in cooperation with European universities. Those Russian universities that had already implemented these activities with the support of the government of Finland reported on their success to the Russian government as well as to national funding bodies. In addition, Finnish universities' involvement in Russian internationalization policy legitimized the stakeholders of the latter with the networks governing internationalization at supranational level of the European higher education area, EU, and member states, and served the foreign policy goals of the Russian state. At program and individual micro level, Finnish partners perceived access to international education and career to be as a self-evident right, while their Russian counterparts perceived it as a privilege available to those selected by their superiors only. Furthermore, access to internationalization activities has been interpreted in Russia as evidence of privileged position. this was particularly the case of those international university stakeholders whose administrative and informal resources enabled them to monopolize their access to contact with international partners. Therefore, it has been not only the internal culture of Russian universities that has legitimized and strengthened privilege for specific persons, irrespective to their real contribution to internationalization activities. But it was the fact that these privileged persons were welcomed by Finnish and European partners simply because by being more conspicuous. All these granted Russian internationalization policy stakeholders the informal right to further privileges and impunity for violating basic academic values at home. To summarize the case of Finnish-Russian internationalization, Finnish partners demonstrated little interest in the internal university environment of their Russian partners, being satisfied by the incoming mobility numbers at the macro level of national internationalization policy. They just closed the partnerships with unsustainable intake at the micro level. Some partnerships were developed with privileged Russian universities, including those directly supervised by the government of Russia and the presidential administration. The privileged staff of these universities simultaneously work in Europe, including Finland, and in Russia, while their non-privileged colleagues had no opportunity to work anywhere else outside their universities because of the overloading of the teaching workload. Therefore, one could assume that the low level of interest of democratic universities in what was happening within partner universities operating in a non-democratic context could shadow the decision-making processes and contribute to the appearance of the dark side effects at the intersection of internationalization policy implications. Despite the formal suspension of internationalization with Russia at national and institutional level, the EU and Finland have continued their internationalization policies in other targeted countries, which, like Russia, combine imperial and social legacies and implement their own internationalization policies. Therefore, the intersection of policy implications in non-democratic contexts potentially brings the risk of similar shadows of internationalization with new partners. Therefore, the intersection of policy implications in non-democratic contexts potentially brings the risk of similar shadows. By shadows of internationalization, we mean all decision-making processes invisible to or unnoticed by international partners from democratic countries, which appear at the intersection of their internationalization policies and policies of the countries where university autonomy, democracy, and academic freedom have not taken root by historical reasons. These countries and policy stakeholders implement their own internationalization policies using EU initiatives for their own benefit, not necessarily contributed to wider community or to their society at all. This may lead to the construction of simulacra that undermine university autonomy, democracy, and academic freedom within the partnerships and hinder the ensuring of access to quality higher education as a sustainable development goal, SDG 4. All this generates questions regarding the possibilities and practices of different partners for actualizing international policies within the value base in which they are positioned. In addition, it should be noted that the internationalization policies of post-socialist and post-imperial countries have much in common with the internationalization policy of Russia, which increases the probability of similar shadows of internationalization, hindering SDG achievement. If you look at China, we see a deep difference between opportunities for students came from rural and urban regions. India has no specific internationalization policy, but it has a new policy of privatization of the sector. It means that poor state universities or underfunded state universities have less opportunities to be visible for international partners. Kazakhstan is a member of the European higher education area, but there is a trend to direct a funding and administrative support for a flagship university. In Uzbekistan, which is also has its own internationalization policy, different levels of opportunities for international branch campuses and academic and domestic universities are detected. So here you can see the list of references, and please do not hesitate to send me an email if you like to receive this article. Some of them are published in the open access, as well as the article which I present you now. So please do not hesitate to contact me and to ask the references in the case of your interest. To finalize, the concept of shadows of internationalization reveals their impact on the perspectives of development of the core values of higher education: democracy, human rights, inclusiveness, integrity, institutional autonomy, and academic freedom. At the intersection of policy implications as the pillars of quality education. Further, the concept of shadows of internationalization explains how the lessons of internationalization with Russia could be used in internationalization policies of and in the countries with socialist and imperial legacies. Finally, drawing on the shadows of internationalization opens up the perspective to study how the dark side effects of internationalization may be prevented and how internationalization policies may be improved at supranational, national, partnership, university degree programs, and individual level. So thank you for your attention, and thanks the charity team again. I'm looking forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much, Svetlana. Very timely and extremely important topic. And we already have some questions in the chat. Probably I'll ask the people that put the questions on the chat to ask themselves if they want. And the first one is Elena. Elena, do you want to ask the question yourself, or do you want me to read it? Okay, probably Elena can't use the mic.
Just a second, excuse me.
Oh, perfect. No worries. Then I'll wait.
Yeah. I can ask it. Oh, of course. Sorry. My camera is not available, but I can ask it myself. Yeah, actually, Svetlana, thank you very much for your insightful presentation. It was very interesting to learn about your perspective on internationalization of Russia, even though we are speaking about the past days, the days before the war mainly. But still, I think some trends are relevant throughout the whole history of internationalization. So my question is, do you think that internationalization or international education, if you wish, has ever been considered as a social good in Russia, as something related to democracy and equal access to education? Having in mind that even in the official national policy, it is not referred to as internationalization. It has always been referred to as the export of education, which means that the only economic dimension, the economic rationale, is something that is considered important for the government, and other dimensions are just neglected. And so even the KPIs or even the indicators are all in numbers and financial, or numbers of students, or numbers of revenue collected from the international students.
Yes, so income generation and student enrollment.
Yes, exactly. So but you were talking about kind of approach to internationalization as a social good and as a part of democratic process in higher education. Do you think it has ever been relevant, in fact?
If you move 100 years ago to the times of Leon Trotsky and Vladimir Lenin, we'll see that the main approach of the Soviet government was to provide the higher education, or access to higher education for all. Of course, immediately they limited an access to higher education for some classes or previously privileged classes, and then for the nationals, separate nationals, ethnicities. But formally, the social dimension of Russian internationalization policy, I mean Russia is a Russian Socialist Federative Republic as a part of the Soviet Union, it was the very strong focus on social dimension. As to the function of higher education as a public good, if we use the terms of the public sector economics, in modern post-Soviet Russia, it's a paradox that modern post-Soviet Russia is Russian government leadership is obsessed by Western. Sorry, it's recognize my gesture. Current Russian leadership, which Russia has for last 25 years, prioritizes the Western ways of evaluation and prioritize the quantitative KPIs. And as a capitalist country, which is declared by former communists, that former communists who are the leaders of current Russian leadership, declares that now Russia is a capitalist or imperialistic country. So that's why they tried to shoulder the responsibility for funding of universities to the shoulders of these universities. This is the way to avoid social responsibility of the state in front of the university students and staff. And yes, income generation is prioritized, student enrollment is prioritized. But if in the Soviet Union, these KPIs were prioritized for political reasons to demonstrate the preferences of the socialist system in comparison with the capitalism. So now it's just income generation and attempts to realize the state policy. But the state policy, so to summarize, Russia has a long story of the left understanding of higher education. Initially, when higher education mass higher education appeared in the Soviet Union, it should be done for all. It should be provided, and access should be provided for all. But now the focus is definitely commercial. So, do I answer your question, Elena?
Yes, thank you very much. Actually, that aligns with what I think about it. And yeah, thank you for the perspective of the Soviet Union generally. Yeah, but actually, I kind of disagree to some point, because during the Soviet Union, I believe that the main value was to provide the education for all, and international dimension was kind of soft power directed, so to increase the influence of the country worldwide.
Yes, that's what I told.
Yeah, but I don't think that international education was something was a thing that was considered for all, like, because the Soviet Union was
for all progressive humanity.
Yeah, because the Soviet Union authorities had this, imperial mindset, like the Soviet Union is the best country in the world, and we do not need to adopt the perspectives of others. The only thing we need is to share our viewpoint. Something like this.
I would say it's a separate question, the history.
Yeah, sure.
My answer meant that there is now, despite the imperialistic capital and commercial imperialistic trend and commercialization of international higher education, the lining, the history has a deep story. The history of higher education, including international education, as a public good for proletarians, for poor classes, has a long history. So let's move. Thank you, Elena, very much. Right. Let's move to the next questions. Sorry, Hugo. Right.
Yeah, no problem. It's always nice when there's a good discussion, and even a bit of disagreement is also part of the debate, of the dialectic. Yes. So that's fine.
It's a point of growth for new insights.
Absolutely. All right. The next question by Jisam. Jisam, can you ask the question yourself, please?
Yeah. Hi. Thank you so much. It was really interesting. I'm more curious about today. With this political situation. So I assume everything basically kind of stopped, all these international policies. That's my assumption. But if you can describe what's going on now with these political turbulent times in Russia, with I guess many programs for internationalization and student mobility, academic mobility, all these things are in a crisis. So if you can share those examples or current situation, that would be really helpful to understand the situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason, for your kind question. I should say that recently I submitted an article described what happens in political economy of Russian international education now in the book chapter. So please stay tuned. Shortly to describe the situation, it was a complete shock for the system when Russia outbreak the full-scale war. It means that the decision was made at the top, and a very limited number of politicians knew or understood that it could be that, and many experts, I would say that many experts, they overvalued an extent of adequacy and rationality of those who made this decision. And the next shock for Russian higher education was when the European Union introduced an unprecedented sanctions which stopped all kind of institutional cooperation with Russia and Russian universities. It should be noted, by the way, that at individual level, cooperation has been continued, and it is continuing now. Then all universities lost their main partnerships. I remember my project, a project when I was a European expert. I reviewed all 1,000 accredited universities in Russia and looked through the lists of their international partners. And in any universities, including the universities in the Far East, nearest to the Chinese border, in Vladivostok, in Khabarovsk, even these universities had the main number of partners in Europe. Because historically, Russian higher education was built on the Germans' template. And in 90s, European universities were funded well to establish the partnerships with Russia. So now the situation is that Russian universities uses the European the patterns of cooperation with European partners in establishing their new partnerships in the global East and in the global South. And there are very interesting details of what is the result of this policy. In addition, student enrollment is growing, but the problem is international student enrollment is growing, but the problem is that the government statistics is very different, and Russian legislation does not determine clearly what should be included into the number of international students. Because, for example, 200,000 of students are enrolled for full-time study within Russia. But this is the clear figures. So you can see it in the chart. But all other students who are included into the number of international students, the data varied from 300,000 to almost 400,000. So because the government wants to have the number of international students increased, and any practitioner, be honest, any practitioner can take one international student and make at least 10 KPIs. Is it a student who mobility student, short-term mobility, long-term mobility, full-time student? Oh, come on, we all can do it. And therefore, due to the lack in the legislation and this willingness to show the government how good are the things, the data except full-time students are not reliable. So student enrollment growing, teaching workload is growing too, because Russian universities all till now teach students in groups. They have a limited opportunity to choose their courses. There are no individual schedules for students, especially in STEM, in STEM educational programs. Then new partnerships are unsustainable, and they are poorly provided by the expertise. So despite Russia has a very strong scientific school of Eastern studies, more than 150 years, these the graduates are not demanded in the universities because they should be paid, and there are rare universities which hire these specialists, and as a result the mobility is asymmetrical, but in another manner that it was before the war. Before the war, outgoing mobility prevailed. Outgoing mobility from Russia prevailed. But now, incoming mobility of students is much more than outgoing, but outgoing mobility of academics declined significantly, both due to the loss of previous partnerships and due to the sanctions which banned the transfers from Russian bank accounts. So the logistics became complicated.
Right.
I hope, do I answer your question, Tissa?
Okay, let me ask the next question. I'll have to ask it. It's from EGNN, but no mic. So I'll read the question. My question is whether countries with insufficient per capita resources for higher education are doomed into the shadow of internationalization because the resources for internationalized education cannot reach all students. So that's the question.
Sorry, I can't see it. Who is the author? Oh, so many questions.
EGNNU. It's the question right after, in the chat, right after the one posed by Jisan.
Whether the countries with the sufficient per capita resources are doomed to fall. Oh. On the one hand, if there is no money, No money means limited ability for internationalization. But on the other hand, it depends on many factors, on geography, location of the country, where this country is located, how this country understands the necessity and the essence of international education. What are the support programs for this country? For example, I know that there is a fruitful internationalization of Finland with Ethiopia. And there are many great specialists from Ethiopia in Finland who develop these partnerships for decades, I assume. So I would say that the word doomed is not the word which determines the situation, but the shadow, I believe that the shadows of education and probable dark side effects should be taken into account in consideration. In addition, I would recommend you to read my article in co-authorship with Professor Dominik Antonovich and Dr. Marta Jaworska, where we discussed periphery and semi-peripheral countries and their relationships, the opportunities of their networking and internationalization with the core countries in Europe. So hope I answer your questions.
Yes, Svetlana, we need to move because there's plenty of questions here. The next one is by Ao Chen Wang. Doesn't have a mic either. And the question is, would you share some of your outlook, whether pessimistic or hopefully not, on the man-made scarcity of internationalization? Do you think the monopoly is self-reinforcing, even if given time to prosper? What do you think?
It depends on people. It depends. It's not a historical law or economic law. It depends on people. It depends on partners. How pessimistic will be the view on the success of concrete partnership or concrete cooperation with the concrete countries? It depends.
Okay. Next question by Ailun Sun. I will read it as well. So she says, I want to ask about your opinion from Russian context on this statement below. Internationalization in higher education may cause homogenization of academic research to a great extent, and any corresponding solutions maybe.
I would not say that homogenization of academic research is a result of internationalization, especially in Russia. I would give you an example from which is not related to internationalization. It's the first view. For example, if you go, if you drive along the highway, you see the electric tombs for the lamps, and all of them has different angle. So this is Russia. Nobody could be homogeneous at the first glance. It may be looked like totalitarian country, and someone in the leadership want to have it like this, but it is not so, and it never has been like this. Low homogenization, be sure.
All right. The next question is by Itong Jing. I don't know. Do you have the mic? Do you want to ask the question or do you want me to read it? I don't have any instructions on this. Itong?
Hi, can you hear me?
Perfect. Yes,
Yeah,
please.
thank you. Thank you. First, thank you so much for the sharing. And my question is that, since the internationalization has become a selling point of some universities that to show like they're opening to the world, and you talk about the lack of the quality assurance, so which kind of like the stakeholders do you think should be responsible for it?
Oh, both sides, the the tango takes two. There are when you dance, the dance requires two persons for tango. So first of all, it depends on the rector's office. The rector's office, it's my opinion as a person who worked in the central university administration. The rector's office is responsible for development, the templates of university agreements, basic agreements with international partner, and separate agreements for double degrees, for example, should be developed. And in this agreement, it should be written who is responsible for quality assurance, what are the procedures, and of course, I believe that common norms of quality assurance procedures should be developed in equal manner within the university partnerships. So the stakeholders responsible for non-harmonized quality assurance mechanisms are the rector's office, including vice rector for academic affairs and vice rector for international affairs. Their teams should work together. Then central university administrations responsible for academic and for international affairs, program administration, academics involved, and faculty coordinators. These are the list of stakeholders responsible for this. And if you look at one of my articles, I described the responsibilities in detail in my article published 2 years ago. Thank you for your question.
All right, great. Let me ask the next question because Kaman Carol is at work and cannot use the mic. So the question is, to our general understanding, Hong Kong seems to be taking the lead in promoting and implementing internationalization in Asia higher education industry. Do you have any suggestions from your findings to us in better navigating these shadows while maintaining our competitiveness at the same time?
I would assume that any suggestions or any advice requests more deep delving into the context, into the country, into the city, and into the university. I'm not a person who gives the advice just because of consider just to be more media known or person. I do believe that the deep expertise is requested, and of course, if I would work in Hong Kong or in China, I would be more competent to answer your question. But my general suggestion could be not to rely too much on the specialists in international, to the administrators of international relations, because they are trained for increasing the numbers, but we discuss what happens behind these numbers, because each number, each international student, each mobile academic, it's a person, it's a human. And those who develop the decision-making processes should see the humans behind the figures.
All right. Next question is by Xi Jiao. Asked me also to ask the question. Could you please share more on how the concentration of academic freedom and internationalization impacts the quality of education and research in certain countries such as China or India?
The same, the same answer, I would say. But as to the academic freedom, I should say that freedom means not only an ability to read whatever you want, but it is also an ability to be responsible, responsible for the context. To be responsible in front of the community, to be responsible in front of the families, to be responsible in front of the city, to be responsible in front of the country, and to be responsible in front of the world.
All right. Hiwei Yang, do you want to ask the question yourself?
Hi.
Hi.
For short, how might we develop mechanism for international collaboration that both we could respect institutional autonomy and also the local context, while we could effectively addressing the shadow effects that you have described? For instance, could you share your thoughts on whether approaches like transparent selection criteria or independent quality assurance frameworks that could balance these two? Thank you.
Thank you, Kiwi. I like the questions on institutional autonomy because they are always local. The institutional autonomy is deeply related or dependent on the local context. On the other hand, when the international partners come to the local context, it's a creativity, it's an art to develop the new mechanisms. For example, these joint institutions, on the one hand, they are, I mean, Sino-foreign institutions. On the one hand, they are autonomous. On the other hand, they are, of course, under the legislation of local of the country and of the local communities as well. So institutional autonomy is understood differently by definition in the West and in other countries. So first point is to reveal what means the institution, what is the meaning of institutional autonomy for Western partners, and what means the institutional autonomy for local partners. So this is the point, because people like to use the common terms, aiming to speak in one terminology, in one broad language. But the meaning of these terms could be completely different. The same could be told about joint degrees, double degrees, legislation, comparative analysis, etc. So start from the basic tools.
All right, thank you, Svetlana. And I think I have the last question of the chat. I think I didn't miss a single one. Let's hope not. By Peter. Peter, do you want to ask the question yourself? Are you there? Yes, perfect.
Okay. My name is Peter. I'm asking, what is the motivation behind this internationalization of higher education? Is it geographical or is it commercial? Or what is really the motivation that universities consider or countries?
Thank you, Peter, for your question. I have an article published 2 years ago about rationales for internationalization. So it depends on which rationale do you mean. Political rationales, academic rationales, economic rationales, personal rationales, career rationales. So this is a wide spectrum of rationales at macro, meso, micro, and individual level. And each time, so there is no one main rationale for internationalization. It depends on the angle of consideration. And of course, from the local context. Thank you.
Let me ask. I was going to ask the last question, but we have one here, so I'll give the place to Ethan. Okay, Ethan, you asked the question. I can ask the question to Svetlana some other time.
Okay, thank you. And thank you so much for sharing. My question is that in today's Gen AI topic landscape, some of the language and countries may have a dominant priority in the field of AI, right? But at the same time, we all know that it's global or international accessibility is the most transparency ever. So in such in such situation, do you think this kind of a situation reinforce or reduce the shadow effect and also the desire of internationalization of higher education? Thank you.
Thank you, Ethan, for your question. I think it could increase the shadows of internationalization, especially if the main documents regulated institutional arrangements of internationalization will be done with the help of AI equipment and applications. To be serious, yes, there are the risks, but again, it depends on people involved and people developing their institutional arrangement.
All right.
Yeah, hope you are satisfied.
I think it was a quite nice answer. Svetlana, some in the audience asked for some links to your papers. I don't know if you can drop your link from ResearchGate in the chat so that those who are interested in the audience can more easily assess your research. Do you think it's possible? Do you have some link that you can provide?
Yes, please give me a minute to find an appropriate file when I gathered all my publications with the links.
All right.
Just a moment.
Okay, so we can wait a little bit longer. While you're doing that, just to let know of the audience that we're preparing more seminars to coming on this way. We had this really interesting, important discussion on the shadows of internationalization, and thank you so much, Svetlana, for bringing this topic up. I think it's one that we need to continue to do research and to get informed on, because internationalization became part of our world, but our world is going in directions that not always attuned with some of the expected purposes of the internationalization. Monique already put here one of the future seminars. I think we're going to have one or two before this one, but it's not fully confirmed. But put already this one in your agenda if you are interested. It will be on the reconceptualizing of learning agency in feedback, a situational, deliberative, and entangled perspective. And it will be given by Lee Min from Nanyang Technological University from Singapore. All right, so let's give more a minute or two so that Svetlana can provide the link for her work and you can get more acquainted with the articles and the book chapters that she published. So one is already there. One way you can do this, Svetlana, is to drop your email again so that people can contact you. So this is clearly evidence of a seminar that was very successful, right? All right, so here Svetlana left in the last message her email. So please take note of it and contact her so that she can give you all of our publications, the ones that you are interested in. And hopefully you can continue the conversation that we started here as well. So let me conclude this seminar by thank you Svetlana, and also the audience for this great talk. And stay tuned for more, and we will be in touch. In the meantime, have a very nice end of the weekend, of the week, not the weekend. The weekend will come soon. Right. Okay.
Thank you, Hugo. Thank you, Hugo, and thank you, dear guests, for your attention and your interest. Please do not hesitate to send me an email, and I am looking for our further cooperation. It was very nice. It is a pleasure to present my studies for this respective audience. Thank you very much. Okay.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you. All right. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.